The night began with silence, the kind of silence that hides more than it shows. The streets of the city were alive with neon lights and passing cars, but inside Sandra Bullock's heart, there was only a quiet storm. She had agreed to go out, though her soul begged her to stay home. The world knew her as strong, bright, and full of charm. Yet tonight her smile was heavy, a mask worn only for the sake of others. She did not want to be seen, not by the public, not by strangers, not even by herself in the mirror. But there was one person who noticed the cracks in her silence. Keanu Reeves. He had sensed her hesitation earlier in the day, and though she tried to hide it with soft laughter and carefully chosen words, he understood. He always understood. So he made no demands, asked no hard questions, but gently suggested they take a walk, far from the crowd, into a corner of the city where the noise would not press against her. From the very first steps of their walk, something unusual filled the air. The city seemed quieter than usual, and each passing sound felt distant. Keanu walked beside her, not ahead, not behind, but right by her side, his presence steady like a lighthouse in the middle of a storm. Sandra glanced at him once, and the calm in his eyes almost broke her. It was the calm of a man who carried his own scars, yet refused to let another drown in theirs. As they turned down a quiet street lined with old brick walls and faint golden streetlights, Sandra felt the weight of the night pressing harder. She tried to keep her words light, talking about simple things, memories from films, old jokes, little moments that usually made them laugh. But tonight, her voice betrayed her. It trembled in small ways, like glass barely holding together. Keanu did not interrupt. He let her speak. And in his silence, she found a strange comfort, because his silence was not empty. It was respectful, patient, and full of presence. Then came the first twist of the evening. A small group of strangers recognized them. A few whispered. Some pointed, and one even called out, asking for a picture. Sandra froze. She wasn't ready to be seen. The mask she had built all day felt like it would shatter with one more request. Her chest tightened. But before panic could take over, Keanu stepped forward, gentle but firm. He smiled at the strangers, raised his hand politely, and said, "Not tonight, thank you." His voice was soft, not harsh, yet final. The group understood. They backed away, disappointed but respectful. Sandra exhaled, realizing she had been holding her breath. Keanu looked at her then, not with pity, but with quiet strength. It was the look of someone saying without words, "I am here. I will not let this night hurt you." And for the first time in hours, Sandra's lips curved into a real smile, small but alive. As they walked further, the night deepened, and with it, her walls began to weaken. She spoke about things she usually kept locked away, the fear of being alone, the pressure of always being perfect, the loneliness that fame never cured. Every sentence she spoke felt like it cost her pieces of herself, but Keanu listened as if those pieces were treasures. He never rushed her, never tried to fix what she confessed. Instead, he let her know through his stillness that her voice was safe, her pain was safe, and that in this moment she did not have to carry the weight alone. And then, an unexpected moment happened. They passed an old cafe, the kind with wooden chairs and foggy windows. The owner, an elderly woman with silver hair, stood outside, waving to them warmly. She seemed to know nothing about fame or faces on movie posters. She only saw two people walking quietly through the night. "Come in," she said with kindness. "You look like you could use a little tea." Sandra hesitated, but Keanu gave her a soft nod. They entered. The cafe was nearly empty, lit by a few candles and the gentle hum of an old radio. The woman served them tea without asking questions, without pointing, without intruding. The world outside disappeared. Sandra sat across from Keanu at a small wooden table, her fingers wrapped around the warm cup, her eyes glistening with emotions she had tried so hard to hide. It was here, in that little cafe, that her silence finally broke. Tears rolled down, her cheeks without permission, and for a moment she felt weak. But Keanu reached across the table, not to wipe her tears away, but to hold her hand firmly. "You don't have to explain," he whispered. "Just breathe." His words were simple, yet they carried the power of safety, of loyalty, of friendship. That went deeper than any spotlight. Sandra closed her eyes, letting his presence anchor her. In that gentle night, away from flashing cameras and loud applause, she felt something she had almost forgotten: peace. But peace never lasts forever. As the clock ticked, and as the night stretched longer, something unexpected waited outside those cafe doors. Something that would test their bond, their patience, and their strength. The cafe felt like a secret world, a place untouched by the weight of fame and the noise of the city. Sandra sat with her hands wrapped tightly around the cup, her tears drying slowly, though her heart still trembled. Across from her, Keanu remained calm, his steady gaze never leaving her. It was as if his quiet presence told her that no storm inside her could push him away. For a while, they didn't speak. Silence filled the air, but it wasn't the heavy silence that had haunted her earlier. This one was lighter, almost healing, Sandra thought to herself. Why does it feel easier to fall apart in front of him than to hold everything together for the rest of the world? She wanted to ask him, but she didn't. Instead, she let the question linger quietly in her chest. Just when she felt herself settle into the fragile peace, the cafe door creaked open. A gust of cold night air swept in, along with 3 strangers. They weren't loud at first, but their eyes widened as they recognized the faces at the corner table. Whispers passed between them. Sandra's stomach knotted. She wasn't ready for more eyes, more curiosity. Keanu leaned back slightly, his body relaxed but his focus sharp. He had seen this look in strangers before. The thrill of discovery, the hunger for a moment they could carry home as a story. One of the men reached for his phone, tilting it discreetly toward the table. Sandra froze. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the shadows of the cafe walls. Before the man could press the button, Keanu rose to his feet, calm but unshakable. He walked toward the group, his steps slow, deliberate. "Please," he said softly. "Not tonight." There was no anger in his voice, no threat, only a plea that carried the weight of honesty. For a second, the group hesitated. One of them, perhaps embarrassed, lowered his phone. Another looked disappointed, but something in Keanu's tone made them stop. Sandra watched this unfold, her heart pounding. She expected Keanu to return quickly, but he didn't. Instead, he stayed by the door, speaking quietly with the group. She couldn't hear every word, but the look on his face said enough, firmness mixed with compassion. He wasn't shielding her out of pride, he was protecting her with kindness, a kind that respected both her and the strangers. After a tense minute, the group nodded and stepped outside. The cafe door closed again, the sound echoing through the stillness. Keanu returned to the table, sitting down as though nothing had happened. "You're safe," he said simply. That was when Sandra's defenses broke again, not from fear this time, but from gratitude. "How do you do that?" she whispered. "How do you make people listen without making them feel small?" Keanu shrugged gently. People carry their own struggles. Sometimes all they need is a reminder to respect someone else's. His words were quiet, but they struck her deeply. Sandra wanted to tell him everything then. The reason her heart was so heavy tonight, the memory that wouldn't leave her. But the words stuck. It wasn't that she didn't trust him. It was that saying it aloud would make it too real. She lowered her head, afraid her silence would seem like weakness. Keanu noticed. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, his eyes steady on hers. "You don't have to speak until you're ready," he said. "Sometimes carrying the silence together is enough." The line lingered between them like a promise. Sandra breathed slowly, and for a moment she thought maybe that was true, that maybe she didn't have to explain, not tonight. But just as the thought comforted her, another twist arrived. The cafe lights flickered suddenly, the radio cutting out mid-song. The elderly woman behind the counter looked up, frowning. "The power's been unstable these nights," she murmured. Darkness pressed against the windows, broken only by the dim candlelight. Sandra felt her chest tighten. The night had already been heavy, and now the darkness outside seemed to mirror the shadows in her heart. Keanu noticed her unease. He stood, moving to the counter to help the woman light more candles. His movements were calm, practical, almost ordinary, but to Sandra, every act of his felt extraordinary because it reminded her of something she had forgotten. Safety didn't always come from grand gestures. Sometimes it lived in the simplest actions. As the room warmed again with soft golden light, Sandra finally found her voice. "Keanu," she said softly, "do you ever feel like the world expects you to be unbreakable, even when you're already broken inside?" He paused, his hand resting on the edge of the table before he sat back down. His face grew thoughtful, shadowed by the candle's glow. "All the time," he admitted. "But maybe being unbreakable doesn't mean never falling apart. Maybe it means finding people who can sit with you when you do." His words landed like a stone in her heart, heavy and undeniable. Tears burned her eyes again, but this time they were different. Less from fear, more from release. And yet, before she could answer, another interruption came. The cafe door burst, open once more, this time not with curious strangers, but with a frantic young woman. Her hair was tangled, her eyes wide, and her breath sharp with panic. She rushed to the counter, crying out, "Please, I need help! My brother!" He collapsed. Outside, Sandra and Keanu both turned, startled. The elderly woman gasped, rushing to the door. Without hesitation, Keanu stood, his chair scraping against the wooden floor. His calm eyes met Sandra's for a brief second, as if asking without words, "Will you come with me?" Sandra's heart pounded. She hadn't expected this night to become about anyone else, but life rarely asked permission before pulling people into its storms. Slowly she rose, following Keanu out into the cold night. On the sidewalk, a young man lay unconscious, his body curled near the edge of the street. The girl knelt beside him, sobbing. Keanu dropped to his knees, checking for breath, checking for signs of life. Sandra stood frozen at first, but then something inside her stirred. She rushed forward, kneeling opposite Keanu, her hands trembling as she tried to comfort the girl. The night that had begun as Sandra's quiet storm was no longer about her alone. It had transformed into something unexpected, something larger, something that would test both her strength and Keanu's resolve. And as the city lights flickered around them, the gentle night out was about to turn into a night they would never forget. The cold pavement pressed against the night as Keanu knelt beside the unconscious man. His calm hands searched quickly for a pulse, his expression focused but steady. Sandra watched him, her heart pounding, her breath shallow. She had seen him play heroes on screen, but this was different. This was real. This was raw. The young girl clutched her brother's hand, tears streaking down her face. "Please, someone help him," she whispered, her voice breaking with fear. Keanu spoke softly, almost like a whisper meant to carry strength. "He's breathing," he said, glancing at the girl. "His pulse is weak, but it's there. We need to keep him steady until help comes." Sandra felt her chest loosen slightly at those words, but the tension remained. She crouched beside the girl, gently wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "You're not alone," she said. Her voice, though trembling, carried warmth. She was speaking not only to the girl, but to herself. The street around them was strangely empty. The usual city noise distant tonight, every sound. The girl's sobs, the faint hum of traffic blocks away, the shaky breaths of the man on the ground, felt amplified. The world had narrowed to this small circle of people, bound by urgency and fear. Keanu removed his jacket, folding it carefully before slipping it beneath the man's head. His movements were deliberate, filled with quiet care. He looked up at Sandra briefly, their eyes locking. No words passed, but something unspoken traveled between them. "We are in this together." Then came the first twist of the night. As Keanu steadied the man, he noticed a small bottle lying near his hand, its label faint under the streetlight. His eyes sharpened. He picked it up, recognizing it as a prescription medication. Half of it was empty. "Overdose," he muttered under his breath. Sandra's eyes widened. The girl gasped. No, he wouldn't. He promised me he wouldn't," she cried, gripping her brother tighter. Keanu's voice was calm but urgent. "He's fighting. We need an ambulance now." Sandra reached for her phone, dialing quickly. Her hands shook as she explained to the dispatcher, her words stumbling but desperate. When she hung up, she whispered, "They're on their way. 10 minutes." 10 minutes. 10 minutes could feel like forever when a life was hanging by a thread. Sandra's mind raced. She looked at the young girl, who seemed barely more than a teenager, her face pale with fear. "Stay with him," Sandra said softly. "Talk to him. Sometimes they hear us, even when they can't respond." The girl nodded, tears dripping onto her brother's sleeve. "Please come back to me," she whispered to him, her voice trembling but full of love. Keanu glanced at Sandra again. She could see the quiet storm in his eyes. Not panic, but the weight of knowing how fragile this moment was. He pressed 2 fingers gently to the man's neck, monitoring his pulse. His calmness grounded them, though Sandra's heart still pounded. In her chest, as the minutes passed, Sandra felt herself unravel inside. The night had begun with her own struggles, her own pain. Yet now she found herself caught in the storm of another family's despair. But strangely, in helping them, she felt something stirring within her, a reminder of strength she thought she had lost. Then another moment of tension arrived. Headlights appeared in the distance, slowing as they approached. Sandra thought it was the ambulance, but instead it was a sleek black car pulling up beside the curb. The window rolled down, and a man inside leaned out, his expression sharp. "What's going on here?" he demanded. The girl flinched, clutching her brother. Sandra felt unease ripple through her. Keanu looked at the man calmly, explaining, "Medical emergency. Ambulance is coming." The stranger's eyes flicked to Sandra, recognition dawning. "You're Sandra Bullock," he said, his tone shifting into something greedy, opportunistic. "And Keanu Reeves. This is unbelievable." Sandra's stomach tightened. Not tonight, not now. She wanted to vanish from his sight. The man lifted his phone, angling it toward them. "This will go viral," he muttered. Keanu stood, placing himself directly between the stranger and Sandra. His voice was firm, steady. "Put it away. This isn't the time." For a moment, the air froze. The man hesitated, torn between curiosity, fame, and decency. Sandra's heart raced. What if he ignored Keanu? What if the image spread across the world before dawn? But something in Keanu's stillness, the weight of his gaze, broke the tension. The man lowered his phone, muttering, "Fine." With a flick of his hand, he rolled the window up, and the car drove off. Sandra exhaled deeply, realizing she had been holding her breath again. Her chest burned with the weight of fear and relief. Keanu returned to the sidewalk, kneeling once more by the unconscious man as if nothing had happened. The sirens finally broke through the night, growing louder, sharper, closer. Red and blue lights painted the brick walls around them. The ambulance pulled up, paramedics rushing out. They worked quickly, checking vitals, administering oxygen, preparing to move the young man. The girl clung to Sandra, sobbing as the paramedics lifted her brother onto a stretcher. "Is he going to be okay?" she cried. One of the paramedics gave a small nod. "He has a chance. You brought him help in time." As they loaded him into the ambulance, the girl turned to Sandra and Keanu, her voice trembling. "Thank you. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been here." Sandra squeezed her hand, her own tears welling. "Just promise him he's not alone," she whispered. The ambulance drove off into the night, carrying the weight of fear, hope, and unanswered questions. The street grew quiet again, leaving Sandra and Keanu standing beneath the dim glow of the streetlights. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Sandra whispered, "Keanu, why does it feel like every time I try to run from my pain, life finds another way to remind me of it?" Keanu looked at her, his expression gentle. "Maybe it's not reminding you of the pain," he said softly. "Maybe it's reminding you that even in the middle of it, you can still choose kindness. And maybe that's where healing begins." The words sank deep into her heart, heavier than the silence of the night. But neither of them knew. This night was far from over. Another storm was waiting just beyond the shadows, and it would test not only Sandra's strength, but the bond she shared with Keanu in ways she could not yet imagine. The red and blue glow from the ambulance lights faded, slowly into the distance, leaving the street wrapped again in silence. Sandra stood still, her arms folded gently across her chest as if holding herself together. Keanu remained a few steps ahead, his figure framed by the faint glow of the street lamps. For a long moment, they said nothing. The night had already carried too much weight. Then Sandra spoke, her voice low, almost breaking. "I didn't expect this night to turn into this. I thought it was going to be just me and my shadows. Instead, we ended up in the middle of someone else's storm." Keanu turned, his eyes steady on her. "Sometimes being in someone else's storm reminds us that we're not alone in ours," he said. The softness in his tone made her chest tighten. She wanted to believe those words, but her doubts clung to her like chains. They walked slowly back toward the cafe, but when they reached it, the door was locked. The elderly woman who had welcomed them earlier had closed for the night. Only the faint glow of candles flickered inside. Sandra felt a pang of disappointment, as if the little haven they had found had slipped away too soon. "Where now?" she asked quietly. Keanu glanced down the street, then back at her. "We don't need a place. Sometimes just walking is enough." So they walked. The streets stretched out before them, lined with sleeping shops and shuttered doors. The city was quieter now, as if even the noise had grown tired. Sandra's mind wandered, her thoughts heavy. She thought about the girl's face when her brother was taken away, the desperation in her voice. She thought about her own hidden wounds, the ones she kept buried beneath her smile. She finally asked the question that had been pressing inside her chest all night. "Keanu, how do you keep carrying so much? You've had your losses, your pain, but you still show up for people like me, like that girl, like strangers on the street. How do you not break?" He slowed, his eyes fixed on the pavement as he thought. "I do break," he admitted softly. "But maybe breaking isn't the enemy. Maybe the enemy is pretending we never do. When I fall apart, I try to fall in places where kindness can reach me. Sometimes it's strangers. Sometimes it's friends. Tonight, it's you." His words hit her harder than she expected. Sandra's throat tightened. "Me?" He nodded gently. "Yes. Don't think I'm only carrying you tonight. You're carrying me too. The simplicity of that truth shook her. For years she had believed her worth was tied only to what she gave, not what she could be for others. But hearing Keanu say she was a source of strength, even in her fragile state, made her heart ache with something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Before she could answer, another unexpected moment unfolded. Ahead of them, near the corner of a dim alley, a figure sat slumped against the wall. At first, Sandra thought it was just another person lost to the city's shadows. But as they drew closer, she realized it was a man with a sign in front of him, scrawled in shaky handwriting. Hungry. Anything helps. The man's clothes were torn, his face lined with exhaustion. Sandra stopped in her tracks, her heart twisting. She had walked past scenes like this before in her life, always with the excuse that she had nothing to give or no time to stop. Tonight felt different. Maybe because her own pain had made her see his more clearly. Keanu approached quietly, kneeling, down so he was at eye level with the man. "How long since you ate?" he asked softly. The man's voice cracked, rough from thirst. 2 days. Without hesitation, Keanu pulled a small folded bill from his pocket, pressing it gently into the man's hand. "Find something warm tonight," he said. But Sandra wasn't ready to move on. Something inside her stirred. She slipped off her scarf, the one she had wrapped around herself earlier to hide the trembling of her body. It was soft and warm, and she had clung to it all night like a shield. She bent down, placing it around the man's shoulders. "Stay warm," she whispered. The man looked at her, his eyes filling with tears. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely audible. As they walked away, Sandra felt a strange release in her chest. Giving that scarf had cost her comfort, but in return, it had given her something greater. Keanu looked at her, his eyes soft but full of meaning. "That was more than a scarf," he said gently. "Maybe it was," she whispered back. They continued walking, but the night wasn't finished with them yet. Just as the city began to grow quiet again, a sound broke through the air, angry voices echoing from a nearby alley. Sandra froze, her instincts telling her to turn away. But Keanu slowed, listening. The shouts grew louder, mixed with the sharp crash of glass breaking. They exchanged a glance. Sandra shook her head nervously. "Keanu, let's not—" But he placed a calming hand near hers, not grabbing, just reassuring. "We'll keep our distance, but no one should be hurt tonight." Cautiously, they moved closer to the alley, the shadows deepening around them. Sandra's breath caught in her throat. 2 men were arguing violently, their anger sharp enough to cut through the night. One shoved the other against the wall, fists clenched. Sandra's heart raced. This was not the kind of storm she wanted to step into. But Keanu's presence beside her steadied her fear. He didn't rush forward recklessly. He watched, waiting for the right moment, his calmness like a shield. And as the argument escalated, Sandra realized this night was not only about her pain anymore. It was about something larger, about the choice to step into darkness with kindness, even when the world offered no safety. The night had begun as a gentle escape, but now it had become a test. And with every step, Sandra knew her life was being changed in ways she would only understand later. The alley was darker than the rest of the street, the kind of darkness that seemed to breathe on its own. Sandra's heartbeat quickened as the 2 men's voices rose. One of them, tall and broad, slammed the other into the brick wall, his face twisted with rage. The other struggled weakly, his voice trembling as he begged, "Please, I don't owe you more, I swear." Sandra gripped her hands tightly. Every part of her wanted to turn back, to escape before the storm swallowed them. But Keanu didn't. Move away. He stood still, watching with an unshakable calm, waiting like the ocean before a wave. "Keanu," Sandra whispered urgently, "this isn't our fight. Let's go." He turned to her, his voice low but steady. Sometimes the fight finds us, even when we don't want it. Before she could protest, the aggressor raised his fist, ready to strike. Instinct took over Keanu. He stepped forward, his voice cutting through the alley. Enough! The man froze, startled by the sudden intrusion. His eyes flicked to Keanu, and recognition dawned slowly. Wait a second. Aren't you? Keanu didn't let him finish. His tone stayed calm, not confrontational. It doesn't matter who I am. Hurting him won't solve anything. The aggressor's face twisted with defiance. This isn't your business. Keanu didn't back down. Maybe not, but kindness is everyone's business. Sandra watched, her chest tight with fear. The moment felt fragile, balanced between violence and peace. One wrong word could tip it. The man hesitated, lowering his fist slightly but still glaring. He owes me money. He thinks he can walk away. The smaller man cried out, I'll pay you back. I just need time. Sandra felt her throat close. She saw desperation in both their faces, the hunger of anger, the ache of fear. She realized this wasn't just a fight about money. It was a fight about survival. Keanu reached into his pocket slowly, pulling out a folded bill. He held it out, not boastfully but humbly. Take this. Walk away tonight. Give him a chance. The aggressor stared, torn between pride and temptation. Silence pressed heavy around them. Then, with a grunt, he snatched the money and stepped back. Fine, but this isn't over, he muttered, before storming out of the alley. The smaller man collapsed to his knees, his chest heaving. Thank you, he whispered, his voice breaking. I thought he was going to... His words trailed off. Keanu placed a hand gently on his shoulder. Find your strength. You're worth more than what you owe. Sandra's eyes filled with tears as she watched. Something inside her shifted. All night she had been drowning in her own pain, convinced she had nothing left to give. But watching Keanu step into other people's storms reminded her of something she had forgotten. Her own storms didn't define her, but how she faced them did. As they walked out of the alley, Sandra finally spoke. Keanu, how do you stay so calm in the middle of chaos? He looked at her quietly, his steps slow. Chaos has followed me most of my life, he said. If I let it control me, I'd drown. So I try to be the calm the storm doesn't expect. His words wrapped around her like a thread, fragile yet unbreakable. They continued down the street, the city lights faint in the distance. Sandra thought the worst of the night was behind them. But then came another twist. A small crowd had gathered at the corner of the next street, murmuring anxiously. Sandra and Keanu moved closer, curiosity pulling them forward. At the center of the crowd was a woman kneeling on the ground, her hands pressed against a dog that lay motionless on the pavement. The woman's sobs cut through the night. He ran into the road. The car didn't stop. Please, someone help him. Sandra's heart shattered at the sight. She loved animals, and seeing the dog's still body brought back memories of her own childhood pet, the one she had lost so many years ago. She froze, her breath catching. Keanu crouched beside the woman, speaking softly. He's still breathing, he said, placing his hand gently near the dog's chest. The woman looked at him with desperate hope. Please, please save him. Without hesitation, Keanu removed his coat again, wrapping it gently around the dog. He lifted the animal with care, his arms steady. There's a 24-hour vet nearby, he said to the woman. Let's go. Sandra followed, her tears streaming silently. She watched the woman cling to Keanu's side, thanking him over and over as they hurried through the quiet streets. Inside the small veterinary clinic, the dog was rushed away by staff. The woman sank into a chair, her face buried in her hands. Sandra sat beside her, placing a hand softly on her back. He's in good hands now, she whispered. The woman lifted her head, her eyes red. I don't even know your names, but... Tonight you saved more than just him. You reminded me there are still good people in this world. Sandra's heart trembled. She realized the woman wasn't just speaking about Keanu. She was speaking about both of them. When they stepped back into the night, Sandra finally let out the truth she had held inside since the beginning. Keanu, I was so close to breaking. Tonight. I didn't want anyone to see me. I thought I had nothing left. But walking with you, seeing the way you never turned away from anyone's pain, it's teaching me something. He looked at her softly. What's that? She swallowed, her voice fragile. That maybe my pain doesn't make me weaker. Maybe it makes me see others more clearly. Maybe it's not a curse. It's a reminder to stay human. Keanu's eyes shone under the streetlight. He didn't speak right away, but his silence was louder than words. It was the silence of respect, of understanding. Yet even as the moment settled gently between them, Sandra felt an unease. The night had tested them over and over, and part of her feared the storm wasn't finished. And she was right. Because as they turned onto another street, a shadow stepped into their path. This time, it wasn't a stranger in need. It was someone who had been waiting for them. The shadow that stepped into their path was not rushing, not frantic like the girl who had called for help, not desperate like the man in the alley, and not pleading like the woman with her injured dog. This presence was different. It was deliberate. A man emerged from the dim glow of the street lamp, his face partially hidden by the hood of his jacket. Sandra's breath caught. Something about the stillness in his movements made her uneasy. Keanu's posture shifted, not aggressive, but protective, as though his body had already decided its role before his mind had spoken. The man's voice was low, almost casual, yet sharp enough to cut through the silence. Long night, isn't it? Keanu didn't answer immediately. He studied the man, waiting. Sandra felt her palms grow damp. The stranger stepped closer, his eyes flicking between them. You're Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock. I've been waiting to see you both. Sandra's stomach twisted. Waiting? The word felt heavy, loaded. What do you want? Keanu asked, his tone calm but firm. The man gave a small laugh, though it carried no joy. What everyone wants from you. Proof that you're not as untouchable as the world thinks. He pulled something from his pocket. At first it looked like a phone, but the way he gripped it made Sandra tense. She clutched Keanu's arm without realizing it. You've spent the night helping people, the man continued. But tell me, who helps you when the lights go out? Who saves you when no one's watching? Keanu didn't flinch. Sometimes no one does. Sometimes you save yourself. Sometimes a stranger becomes the one who helps. The man stared at him for a long moment, then exhaled sharply. He slipped the object back into his pocket. It was just a crumpled pack of cigarettes. Sandra let out a shaky breath she hadn't known she was holding. But the man wasn't finished. The world eats people like you alive, he muttered, his voice tinged with bitterness. People cheer you, then tear you apart. I've watched it happen. And tonight, I wanted to see if you'd break. Silence followed, heavy as stone. Keanu stepped forward slightly, placing himself gently in front of Sandra. Maybe the world does that, he said softly. But breaking doesn't mean ending. Sometimes it means beginning again. The man's eyes flickered, as if those words had cracked something inside him. His shoulders slumped slightly, and without another word, he turned and disappeared back into the shadows. Sandra's body trembled as the silence closed in again. Keanu, what if he comes back? He looked at her gently. Then we face him, but we don't live in fear of shadows. They walked on, the night quieter now, the streets slowly leading back toward the heart of the city. Sandra felt exhausted, But it wasn't the kind of exhaustion that left her empty. It was the kind that left her open. Open to feelings she had buried, open to truths she had avoided, open to the fragile beauty of being human. They stopped at a small park, the benches glistening faintly with dew under the streetlights. Sandra sat down, her body heavy but her heart lighter than it had been in months. Keanu sat beside her, the silence stretching comfortably between them. Finally, she spoke. All night I thought I was going to collapse under my own weight. I thought this night was about hiding my pain. But now, I see it differently. This night wasn't about escaping. It was about remembering that I'm not alone. Keanu nodded slowly. We're never as alone as we think. Sometimes the world reminds us of that in ways we don't expect. Her eyes glistened as she turned to him. You've carried so much tonight, not just for me, but for strangers who may never see you again. Why do you keep doing it? He looked out at the empty park, his voice soft but steady. Because kindness doesn't need to be remembered. It just needs to be done. And sometimes, in helping others, we find pieces of ourselves we thought were gone. Sandra felt her throat tighten with emotion. She leaned back against the bench, breathing slowly. Tonight was supposed to be the night I broke. But instead, it became the night I began again. The words hung in the cool air, carried gently by the quiet wind. Keanu didn't respond with a speech or a grand gesture. Instead, he simply sat beside her, his presence steady, his silence filled with more than words could carry. And for Sandra, that was enough. More than enough. The city around them remained restless, filled with storms and shadows. But in that small park, on that gentle night out, Sandra Bullock finally felt the kind of peace she thought she had lost forever. Peace not born of escape, but of shared resilience, quiet kindness, and the strength to begin again. The night had tested them both. And in its trials, it had given them something far greater than answers. It had given them the reminder that even in the darkest streets, even in the heaviest storms, kindness could still light the way.